so the picture will be improved. We've had our best day since I've been here, and a crap Easter, hasn't it, for weather?
Well, it has since you've been up here. Fortunately, we had a few days before you got here which were beautiful, similarly, even more so. Anyway, when we were talking last, I'd had about 5 years with Downers, and as it turns out, of course, Jenny was about just on 5 years old. It was Easter. She was just about to start school, and we'd just come back from Auckland, where we'd been for a short period, and we came back to Parramatta, and you people went to Parramatta School, all of you. As it turns out, we would have a very stable time from there on in terms of where we lived, because although at one stage I did get asked whether I would be prepared to go to work in Dunedin as the regional manager, we didn't move, and there were a couple of other projects which might have gone to had they happened, but we didn't get them. So from 1973 onwards, we had a fairly stable home life in terms of where we lived. Just briefly with my career from there on in, there were a series of groups of things that happened which resulted in me being very fortunate in being involved in a wide range of different types of job, which with our size of company, just big enough to have expertise in a lot of areas. And so in the mid-1970s there was an oil crisis. Oil had been about $4 a barrel or something, and it suddenly shot up with the Arab countries wanting very much increased prices. There was a major time of inflation in New Zealand because they didn't manage that properly. But anyway, in fact, inflation from 1973 onwards in New Zealand went from what it had been before, about 2% per annum, for many, many years. It went up to 15% per annum, compounded, year after year. So that over 7 years prices would double on a 15% compounded. So that was very bad but that's nothing to do with what we were doing, although as a result of the oil crisis, in fact there was a second oil crisis in 1973, which really scared everybody, about 1976 perhaps, I'm not sure. As a result of it, New Zealand decided they would have a think big policy, that they would look at the things they could do and establish work in New Zealand. For instance, the petrochemical, the gas off the Taranaki coast was brought ashore.
So I think big was a term used by Robert Muldoon, who was in power at the time. It was his sort of platform for all these think big projects. Yeah, Karen.
I think that's right. Yes.
Yeah,
and
petrochemical.
And they brought the gas ashore, so pipelines were then built up to Auckland, down to Wellington. The gas was used and in Wellington just domestically, but in Auckland and also in Auckland domestically. And there were proposals for gas-fired power stations on the Waikato River near Hamilton, and petrochemical complexes at Taranaki to change the gas into methanol. And then something that hadn't been done before in a large scale was changing natural gas to petrol. So it was called the gas to gasoline works. It was very large, about $1.5 billion in those days, plant to do it. Yeah. And it was predicated on the fact that gasoline would go right up above $30 a gallon, $30 a barrel, which it never did quite do. But anyway, this was set up, and there were that was one leg of the think big, was the gas. And the second thing was put a refinery at Marsden Point near Whangarei. The third thing was to expand the steelworks, which is in New Zealand, just out of Auckland. And then there was work, that extension to the Bluff smelter, which converted effectively electricity into aluminium, imported the alumina from Australia, put electricity through it, and it became aluminium. Now all these various jobs, so Downers did most of the construction work, or almost all the construction work at the New Zealand Aluminium Smelters Limited at the Bluff in Invercargill. They did the most of any contractor in the gas to gasoline plant in just out of New Plymouth. They were involved to a very, very difficult job industrially at Marsden Point. They were involved to some extent in another difficult industrial job in at New Zealand Steel at I was going to say Waipu, that's wrong. Just out of Auckland. Yeah. The name will come to me in a minute. By the way, we were talking about a bridge yesterday in the north reach of Auckland Harbour. It was Hobsonville to Greenhithe. I couldn't think of Greenhithe, which that bridge is just being duplicated right now. Anyway, so the Think Big involved all those situations, and Downers were involved in some of the gas pipelining as well. Then there was other work which wasn't part of the Think Big in people's minds particularly, but nevertheless with a similar sort of thing was in which Downers did a lot of work on, is that's the forests in New Zealand. There were large forests of radiata pine which were maturing, and there was 3 mills set up which Downers were involved with, which changed the from which they made wood pulp for paper pulp, or similar sorts of things from wood. One was in Napier, one was in Owakuni, and one was up at Kai Tire. So Downers in fact managed all 3 of those mills, and the Napier one
managed the construction of those mills.
Yeah, we were the main contractor. So we started off with an open field, and then 20 months later, and no plans, and 20 months later ended up with a mill producing, with a timber mill as part of it, but the main part producing paper pulp. So that had to be all there with its own water supply and wastewater treatment and so on and so forth. Okay. And we just worked with the designers and built these. And although I was not on the job, I was quite involved in some of the negotiations and setting them up. And these jobs are all basically the result of maybe 20 key people, whether it's an electrical superintendent looking after all the electrical installation, or a general foreman, general superintendent, combining the actions of all the different foremen, electrical, the mechanical, the civil, and so on and so forth. The job manager himself, the office manager, business manager, and all those, they all had these features. Just check the notes here. And there are also some power schemes which were built up until that time. The state had done all the power scheme. In fact, if you weren't the state, you were not allowed to build a power scheme. So that if you were a large, once again, you get this stupid government-dominated bureaucracy where you had bigger organisations like the New Zealand Forest Products, owned by Carter Holt Harvey, but Tokoroa, just between Hamilton and Taupo, vast forests being dealt with there. And of course they had a lot of waste, and they could have used this waste spark to generate power, but they weren't allowed to generate power and sell the surplus to the grid. Perhaps they could have with a major performance getting a licence and so on. Now, as it turns out, that's all changed, but it was then local authorities were encouraged to go out, and electricity authorities, and build power schemes, and Downers built 2 quite significant standalone power schemes, one on the river which flows out at Monkatani, and this was near Murupara, in the, reasonably near Rotorua, Taupo, but that's a place called Aniwhanua. We built a power scheme on the river there.
Does that have a, you drive over the dam there on the road, or is that another one I'm thinking of? This one you can drive across.
Oh, I think you might be thinking of Wakamaru, which
Yes.
is on across the Waikato, on an alternative road between Taupo and Auckland.
Right, okay.
But no, this was slightly different. It had a head works just damming the river with a small reservoir, and then a reasonably long canal taking the water to below a large falls, and then dropping the water into a power station below the large falls. Then there was another scheme at Patia, which is the Patia River, which is about 50 kilometres east of New Plymouth. That was also a standalone scheme. So we got involved. That's sort of part of the general thinking that New Zealand should go for self-sufficiency in many of these things. I think it's fair to say that those sort of jobs didn't all happen at once. They happened right through till about the early to mid-1980s. In fact, some of the power schemes, the last of the power schemes, is very substantial. It was doing a whole, I think we did 9 tunnels above the reservoir of the Clyde Dam on the Clutha River, just down from Queenstown, making sure, stabilising the valley sides so that there was no potential for landslides into the lake. All this time there was other work going on that I'd been involved with before, things like wharves. We did the Timaru, a wharf at Timaru. The company had built a lot of airfields, actually mostly before I came into the company. I've been quite involved, but they did they did a whole new taxiway for Auckland Airport, which when I was there, and they built the Chatham Islands Airport.
I mean, you came back with a lot of, what was it, crab? From the
Crayfish.
Crayfish from the, that's right.
Yes. I can take no credit for the Chatham Islands Airport. I just managed to, they had a spare seat on the 4-seater plane that was flying over for the opening, and this was vacant, so I was a starter, and I went over, and yes, it's a great centre for crayfish, and was able to come home with crayfish. Mum loves crayfish.
What about the airport in, is it Guam? Was it Guam
Yes, well that's another facet too, which I didn't have a lot to do with, but I got involved with the New Zealand recruitment side of things, as they went offshore and did quite a bit of heavy civil engineering work. They went to Fiji, they went to Papua New Guinea, they went to the Palau, which is an island, part of the Marshall Islands, or close to the Marshall Islands, about 400 miles east of the Philippines. At Palau, they built an airfield for the United States government, plus other things, some infrastructure roading, and that was all about 25 million US. Quite a big job in
yeah, especially in those days.
Yeah, and indicative of the uncertainty of the power situation. The company mobilised 2 ships, smaller ships, and loaded up all the gear from New Zealand, all the stuff they wanted on Palau, all their plant and buildings and so on and so forth. And included in it was a prefabricated diesel storage tank, which they erected once they got there. Managed to get an arrangement with Mobil, I expect, and filled this tank so they had enough diesel there to last the job, because that's how uncertain oil supply was around the world. As it turned out, it would have probably been all right, but that's what they did. And they similarly, when they built the Chathams, not going nearly so far, but they mobilised a very reasonable sized seagoing barge and put all their stuff on it, their buildings, their plant, their prefabricated workshops and all their pipes and so on, sent them over.
Now, you got interviewed by someone, was it from the CIA for one of those jobs? Or was it, perhaps I was not thinking clearly, is it just as a security clearance for, did you do some work for the US Air Force? Or, oh maybe I'm dreaming, but I remember an American official vetting you, making sure your firm was bona fide. Yeah. Did you have any contracts in the Pacific with the US government?
Oh, well, that was with the US government, Palau. And I'd forgotten about that if it has, and it may come back to me, but no doubt the firm would have been checked out as appropriate. And I didn't have a lot to do with that, I've got to say, but it was Arnold Bayliss was the job manager, and he did a very, very good job. And they had formed a very good reputation over there. In New Guinea, once again we built a total power station, not huge, I think about 60 megawatts, something like that, which is relatively small, but it was all there with a headworks to form an upstream dam and a tunnel to carry the water through some mountains or hills to a place where it was convenient to drop it down into the valley below and build a power station and so on.
So they often have a dam up the top and the generator way down below.
Yes.
Because it's more convenient to have the electricity produced down lower.
It's simply that the amount of power you get is the quantity of water times the height through which it falls.
Right. Okay.
So in Switzerland, where I worked on a dam which was 900 feet high, they in fact they dropped the water from high up in the Alps down into the Valais, V-A-L-A-I-S, which is the valley, way down and below the Alps. It went about 3,000 feet, about 1,000 metres, I think.
Oh yeah.
So that you need much less water, a tenth the water than if you're dropping it 100 feet. So if you've got a dam which you would have seen on the Waikato River, which drops the water, let's say 200 feet, you need 10 times as much water as one that drops the water from 2,000 feet.
Okay.
So it's purely, simply energy is force times distance.
Force equals mass times acceleration.
Yeah, that's the force. And
So
energy is
energy is equal to force times distance.
yeah, that's
Okay.
right. Yeah. So
Okay.
it's the energy generated as the
Force equals mass acceleration. So the higher the more mass of water, the more acceleration it's got, the greater force.
well, the greater mass you've got, not the greater acceleration.
But force equals mass times acceleration, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's right. So if you double the mass, you double the force.
If you double acceleration, you double the force.
Yeah, but acceleration, in fact, is the force of gravity. So
Yeah, but it's 10 times 10 metre per second, isn't it? Acceleration of gravity, approximately.
it's 32 point. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Yeah.
So I suppose.
Anyway, I think we're getting a bit sidetracked here. Suffice to say, if you've got a waterfall that's 10 metres high, given the water, and it falls down, and you get it turning a little paddle wheel at the bottom, you can then put a generator on it. It'll generate power. That's 10 metres. Now, if you get on 20 metres, you'll get twice as much power.
Okay.
Because yes, there's twice as much energy in the water.
It's going faster because gravity's accelerated it.
Yes, yeah, that's right. The pressure's greater, yeah, that's right. So, so down as they built power stations in Papua New Guinea. They did quite a bit of gold mine development in Papua New Guinea. In fact, then they got involved in building commercial buildings in Port Moresby. They did some work, not a great deal, on the island, the top island of the Solomons, which is part of New Guinea, where used to be the Hammersley copper mine.
Bougainville?
Bougainville, yeah. And they did some work in there, some just infrastructure work, and they built. They got involved. They did some power station construction in way up in the mountains of Fiji. So they had did this offshore work, and did it very well. Once again, not much credit to me. Alex Swainson was the moving force behind that, although I inevitably got involved, particularly when they wanted new staff and so on, and I was quite often given the job to vet put the recruitment in place and that, advertise and vet the people and so on,
Okay.
as I did for a lot of those big jobs, the refinery or wherever.
Okay. I remember you saying the refinery was a lot of industrial relations issues there at Marsden Point, but was I right? I remember you saying that that you covered yourself in the way that, or Downers covered themselves in the way the contract was negotiated.
Yes. Well, it was a large contract that it involved boilermakers, are the people who weld thick steel.
Yeah.
Up to a certain stage, engineers union could weld it. Above that, it got to be boilermakers union, and they were militant, extremely difficult to deal with, and I think when you looked at how much welding there had to be done in the refinery, it required, let's say, 500 boilermakers for 2 years. And when you looked at New Zealand's population analysis, there were only 360 boilermakers in the whole of New Zealand. Obviously, it would be a great picnic for somebody who wanted to have industrial trouble, as in fact Downers had when they got involved in the Tasman pulp mill for which one I hadn't mentioned, but had been done in the earlier days. And but all the contractors in New Zealand said, look, it's stupid us all fighting over this. It obviously needs a combined effort. We'll need all our staff, whoever's got the appropriate staff for this sort of work, as distinct as foremen, those sort of people. And so we should go into this together and offer our services on the basis that we'll charge a fee for our work, and but we're not going to be responsible for the cost of strikes or anything like that. So you just pay us what it costs and we'll get the job done. It sounds a bit rough commercially, but it was the only way to go. And in fact, the whole job was out on strike for a full 6 months. I don't know how many people in the job, could have been 1,000, 1,500 people, all on, not all on strike, but most of them on strike, and the rest couldn't work because the others were on strike. I remember we did it in joint venture with an American company who, it wasn't Bechtel, but it was a company like that, a well-known company.
Morrison Lutsen?
No.
No.
I have been involved with both of those companies, Bechtel and Morrison Lutsen. But anyway, this company sent out one of their top blokes to run it, and he was very good, he really was, and he worked through this dreadful industrial situation and got to the end of it, and I think one of his parting things was, and not bitter, just he was a pretty level-headed sort of bloke. He said, well, New Zealand's a very beautiful country, but it's a hell of a place to build a refinery.
Yes.
So the same industrial trouble was had at the New Zealand Steel out of Auckland.
Yeah.
And and then that work all those various strands of work tended to wind down. There was still a bit of it. Oh, the other one was open cast mining and gold mining, and Downers got involved. Had always been coal mining, open cast coal mining near Hamilton and Hutley since 1944, part of World War II, to get a bit more coal. They'd been working there, and so they were involved in open cast mining there, once again producing coal for the steel and producing coal for the power stations. And then gold mining started up, they opened up open cast gold mining in near Pyro, where Mum first started off her primary school teaching.
That's right.
And right in the middle of Waihi town, quite a small town, they'd been underground mines in the hill and under the town. We were involved in opening up the whole the inside this hill, digging down inside the hill, leaving a shell like a bloody great crater, and taking all the gold ore out, and for it to be processed as a major earthworks operation. And then we also got involved in another one about 10, 20 kilometres away, whose name escapes me for a moment, but I can see it in my mind's eye clear as a bell, where we had similar open cast mining work to do. And we also had the similar sort of work to do, I was going to say down in the South Island near the Waitaki River. That's not right. Later when I retired, I got involved with the contractor who was building there and wanted to get paid appropriately for the work he had done, so I'm consulting there. I didn't get involved in major mining, although I got to know enough about it to deal with it commercially. And I guess that's two things to say. In the latter 1980s and the early 1990s, very much a tail off, but the latter 1980s, there was a substantial inflation in New Zealand, continuing, although it was starting to taper off, and there were a lot of commercial building went on, high-rise building. And everybody who was in the game, knew that we were building buildings that should really have been built over a 20-year period, but they were built over a 5-year period with the people trying to cash in. And these were in Auckland, Wellington and Christchurch. Our main involvement was Wellington, substantial in Auckland and significant in Christchurch. And we built these high-rise buildings just as some of this other civil engineering work was tapering off. But from about in mid-1970s, one of the bridges that the company was building in the Auckland motorway, right near the Central Business District, was an 8-span bridge to take traffic from coming onto the motorway and put it in the right place. And we'd built 4 spans of it, and we were building the 4th or 5th span, and after a day after we'd poured the concrete on it, the false work holding the concrete up collapsed. You've got to hold the concrete up till it's set, and in that case stressed it up because it was pre-stressed. And so we had about 2.5 spans collapsed, and very major cost to put this back and work out what was wrong and complete the last 4 spans. And it ended up in litigation, arbitration, and just by default I drew the short straw of having to deal with this and see it through. And it's my first time of being involved in significant formal dispute proceedings.
What was the name of the dispute or arbitration? What did they do? The X-Bridge?
Oh well, it was. It's a most sort of an unusual name, and it hasn't carried. It's not a big deal. It was called Karangahape Ramp A. Okay. And so that went through to its conclusion, and I learned a certain amount about dispute resolution, knowing slightly more than other people in the company. And as a result of that, from there on in, I seemed to get involved in these things as I knew roughly what it was we had to do. And by and large, it's a pain in the neck. You've got to be meticulous, and you can't cut any corners. You've got to really have everything set up right, otherwise you get, I could say ridiculed. You lose your credibility in terms of presenting your evidence. And so I got involved over a period of time, a fair bit of the time trying to avoid the arbitration, but be in a formal dispute situation, trying to resolve matters, and with a few lawyers hanging around. And I say the lawyers I worked with, I developed very great respect for. One of them was Sir Ian Mackay, and him in particular. And so I, over a period of time, although I was only involved in about 4 arbitrations, I got to know a lot about them. At the same time, there's a standard conditions of contract between construction companies and clients, and these contracts are administered by so-called engineers with a capital E, like an umpire, who makes decisions as to what's fair and what isn't. And there are standard conditions of these, and since that time, once again by default, I found myself involved in doing these, in the development of these conditions of contract, and I have been since about the late 1970s onwards. I still am. I've just finished, I hope, the latest one, the 2003 general conditions, which have incorporated things that people want dealing with.
That's with the Standards Association?
Yeah. And one of the things I also had to get involved with, because like the collapse of that bridge, is in insurance, and what are the various insurance covers, how do they work. And most engineers shy away from it. Most other people, I think it's fair to say, accountants, sort of muck around at the edges, but when there's a major damages situation, you've got to know a bit about the construction and the pricing of the costing and what caused it, and the contractual relationship, as well as knowing a bit about insurances. So I also, by default, became an expert, as they say, in the land of the blind. The one-eyed man is king. So in both those areas, I've done a reasonable amount of work. When I retired from Downers in 1994, I've been working since, and almost all the time it's been in contractual a situation where there's a large sum of money in dispute, usually more than 50,000, and very often more than 200,000, and not infrequently up to $1 million or more. And so people think it's appropriate to spend a bit of time trying to get it resolved, and in their favour, of course, but you can spend a lot of time doing that and make it pay. The biggest one I've done was with an open cast mine, which Downers were doing, and then in the 1980s it was the Labour government came in and axed a whole lot of things that they said were unnecessary. One of them was an open cast mining venture that Downers had bought a lot of equipment for, set up to do over a period of 6 years or something, in Huntly near Hamilton, to expose coal and dig the coal out, and they just cancelled the contract, or the major.
So damages, you were to negotiate damages?
Yes, well, we ended up in fact going to a mini arbitration, and we and that's going back, and remember it's the 1980s. It was $8 million claim we had. We had a higher claim than that, but that's what we got awarded. Plus there's another $6 million in interest, because the interest charges were very high because of the very high inflation at the time. So it's not 6, anyway, the total was just over $13 million. So that's the biggest one I've been involved in.
In those days, that was in the early 80s, so it'd probably be double that now in today's money.
Oh, well, yeah, okay, it will certainly be more. Inflation's down a bit since then, but
during the 80s it was still pretty.
Oh yes, but yeah, that's right. And if you go to yes, that's right. And then now that was sort of mini arbitration. We didn't have full blown situation. We got an ex-commissioner of works to sit and hear what we had to say and give his opinion, which both parties accepted, fortunately.
And who was that? That was the guy.
Jack Chesterman
Yeah.
from Parramatta, who had been Commissioner of Works and Secretary Energy.
Okay.
But there were others like the major hydro project, just upstream from Taupo at Rangipo, where we ended up with a $5 million was paid out on the basis of the work we'd done and hadn't been paid for, the way we interpreted the contract, and they didn't. But that was done once again on didn't get to the arbitration. We had an informal, a formal hearing, but not a full sort of judiciary hearing, and once again, but all parties accepted it. So, since that time, this is the sort of work I've been doing. Not getting to many arbitrations, I'm pleased to say, because it's a pain in the neck. But advising people on what I see their rights to be and how to assess what is appropriate for them to say they are due to be paid, and try to work along those lines. I thought I might get into being an arbitrator myself, so in the mid-1990s I did 2 years as a 2-year exam, a set of stage 1 and stage 2 exams you sit extramurally from Massey University for become a registered arbitrator or licensed arbitrator or whatever, or an arbitrator on the roll of the Institute of Arbitrators. So I did that. That's my last bit of study, which I...
Never say never, Pete.
No, that's right.
Never say never, never say always.
Yeah, that's right. So that's the sort of work I've been doing since.
Okay.
Mind you, I'm very much a part-timer. I swim in the mornings if I can. I get a half an hour swim in at the pool, and by the time I do that and have breakfast, it's 10 o'clock at least. And so this is very much a part-time thing I do, but it's keep me on the boil.
Just before we go on, Pete, just the is it Rangipo? Is that the one where you took me down? It was way beneath off the desert road there in New Zealand, and you go down way down to a huge cabin underground.
Oh yes, that's the underground power station.
It's incredible. That was I just remember going round and round in the back of a pickup truck, way down to the bowels of the earth, and then coming up in this huge underground cabin lit with putting in the turbines there.
Yeah.
And so they took water from where? From which river?
Well, there's the river that flows into the Taupo.
Yeah.
The one that flows in and flows out is the Waikato.
That's right.
And so it's the upper Waikato. Now this water comes from the desert road and the water off the mountain which flows into there. But it also, and something I had nothing to do with myself, but they've formed small dams in the streams around the mountains. Some of these streams were feeding into the Wanganui, but they've trapped the water and brought it round in races and tunnels and so on, and put it round so that it flows into the upper Waikato. Of course, having flown there, it flows down and into this power scheme, which is called the Rangipo power scheme.
Okay.
And then it flows through Lake Taupo and then through 9 more power stations down to the sea.
Okay. So that's out of all those jobs you worked on and down, is there a couple that stand out as being ones you really enjoyed working on, or you found the most the most satisfying?
Well, I suppose there's so much of satisfaction, and as in lots of things as you go through life, you tend to remember the good things about a thing, and the bad things, or the things you didn't enjoy, seem to pale a bit with a bit of luck. so you'd end up remembering the okay things. But there were two jobs which I was or three jobs I suppose I was reasonably involved in, but at a bit of a distance. All of them, in fact, were managed by Ian Mills, who I'd worked with originally when I first came in to Downers on the second go, building on the Wellington motorway. A bloke called Ian Mills, who was a very good engineer, and he built the Upper Waitemata Harbour Bridge, which was quite a sophisticated bridge to build, the one where it goes from Greenock to Hobsonville. The Anawhanua Power Station, which is in the upper reaches of the river that flows down to Okatani, and the power scheme in Patia. And all of those were all power schemes which Downers did virtually everything, not quite, but virtually everything, and they were very well engineered. But I wasn't running them, so I didn't have the day-to-day hassle. But I worked with the blokes there and had an input into the final commercial outcome and the engineering outcome to some degree.
Is that when you were? Because at one stage you were you were the chief engineer for a while. You were the head of New Zealand construction for Downers for a while, for spells during that time.
Yes.
Okay. And
yes. Well,
so that was where you sort of got your oversight.
That's right. From 1973 onwards, I was either chief engineer. I came back to Downers to be chief engineer. Yeah. Then they couldn't think of another. They wanted to call somebody else chief engineer, so they called me engineering manager. Okay. But I was an overview, doing a lot of the preparation of tenders or providing a service to people who are building things. So if they needed engineering assistance, I didn't necessarily give it to them myself, but the group I was working with could. Engineering stuff like Warren Jensen and Larry Savage. And then I had a bit of input, but they were the main brains. And then in the mid-1980s, I went from that position to New Zealand construction manager, which meant that I was the three regional managers in New Zealand, Auckland, Wellington and Dunedin, reported to me. Okay. And it was my job to every 3 months I saw them perhaps every 6 weeks, but then every 3 months we had to do a budget review and an estimate to completion and all that sort of thing, and then I'd have to present through to the general manager and managing director what the projected profits and so on and so forth. And I was responsible for making sure these people had the appropriate resources and so on. They told me what they wanted by and large, and I'd perhaps shift a crane from Auckland to Wellington or from Auckland to Christchurch, which was an offshoot of the Dunedin office, and so on and so forth. It was my job to, or people. And so
what was you were in a news. I've seen a photo of you in a newspaper accepting an award on behalf of Downers. What was that for?
Well, I don't know. A long time ago, and this would be when you were about 2 years old. We built a lake control dam and bridge in the lower Wairarapa, and there was a picture of us in the Wairarapa paper signing the contract. That might have been it you saw.
Okay. Well, maybe there was another. Maybe it was a Downers internal newsletter with a photo of you accepting an award at a. Would it be? Is it some project winning an award for?
Oh yes. Well, this Ian Mills' project, I think it's the Patia hydroelectric scheme, won an award.
Contractors Federation or some such thing.
Oh, that's right. Yes, that's right. And I think Patia and Anawhanua, yes, both won them. I think. Yeah, that's right. Yes, that'll be right. Indeed. Yes, I can remember that now. Yes, indeed. Yeah.
And that was for engineering excellence or just for construction management?
Oh, just construction excellence. This is a good thing a contractor has done, and done it well.
Okay.
But I only accepted it because of I was the manager at the time of not of that job. I didn't manage the job.
And
I wonder is there anything else on the jobs, Matt?
no, I was going to say, how you're enjoying sort of part-time work or retirement now, Pete? How long have you retired? About 5 years?
I know, I think it's 1994.
So almost 10,
Yeah.
9 years. So how have you enjoyed it,
Oh, well,
looking back in retrospect?
by and large, I think I'm very lucky. Very lucky I've come away with the particular, because of my environment I worked in, I can now deal with work, advise people in a sort of, as I say, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. And all these people are very good builders of things, construction people. And by and large, in any particular specialist area, will know more than I do. I know enough about what it is they're doing, from my experience with Downers, to understand what they're doing, to appreciate the implications of some of the things that happen, and then I have the knowledge of the contractual relationships and the insurance situation and so on to be able to assist them with what they're doing. So it can become very tedious. People get very frustrated because they reckon they're owed a lot of money and it seems to take a long time to get anywhere. But I've been very lucky because I can continue to keep my mind working, and it also helps the old money coming in.
Yep.
And that's good. So
Just on construction contracts, refresh my memory, every year you do a few lectures at Canterbury University, don't you?
oh yes, yeah, that's
Refresh
right.
my memory on what you do there.
Well, the university, one of the people down there, Professor Park, who was at Rotherton House when I was there, that's the residential college.
He's a nice guy despite that.
Oh yeah, in spite of that. And he was, he every now and again he'd ring up and say, how about Downers contributing to this, my new concrete laboratory or something. And I always used to say, well, look, I'm sorry, it's pretty hard to make a bob, but if we can do something in kind one day. Anyway, it turns out that their lecturer in engineering contracts, he moved on to another job, and he rang me up and said, can you help out? And so I ended up doing lectures in that, and I've been doing it ever since. This would be about early 1980s, I suppose. And I still do that, and I do 9 one-hour lectures. I'm going down in May to do 6 of them. I do 3 one day, and then a week later 3 another, and then I'll do 3 in October, November on construction contracts. And all engineers, they have to know about, some of them become very knowledgeable about the forces of nature on the earth and rock, or what happens with the forces of water, and then, or else that's hydraulics, soil mechanics, or the structural way structures work, structural engineering, or theory of structures. But all of them, with up to about 97% of them, have to get somebody to build the stuff, unless they're sitting in a laboratory thinking great things. And so they all have to know about this, and it's not terribly exciting. But I anyway, I do that. I go down once a year. At any year they may say, look, we don't want you anymore. But so far they haven't come to that, although it wouldn't surprise me at any time if they do.
Yeah, surprised they haven't changed, the syllabus a little bit to, as they do, people tinker with syllabuses and...
Well, I think, as I said, every engineer, whether you're going to be building canals, you're a hydraulic expert, or you're going to be digging deck excavations, you're a soil mechanics expert, or building bridges or dams, and you're a structures expert, or a combination of all these things. All of them need to get the job built, and they all need to set up proper contracts to do it and understand what's going on. So, yeah. But they, I don't know whether it will continue or not.
Yeah, but anyway, it's been an interesting experience.
Yes, I enjoy it.
And I was just going to check with you. You had a trip to the Middle East at some stage with Downers, didn't you?
Yes, in this time when we were looking at working offshore in New Zealand, had an inquiry. It came through some sort of person who knew of us, who had known Downers from many years before, made a suggestion to the Saudis if they were looking for a good contractor to work in Saudi Arabia, they should think of Downers, setting up an association. So they did, and the managing director and the company secretary went over and had a couple of weeks.
Who was the company secretary then?
Ian Rodley.
Okay, yeah.
I think you might remember him.
Yeah.
And Doug Williamson. They went over and did a suss out situation, and then Ian Frame, a bloke a few years younger than I am, an engineer, he and I were then sent over to do another run on what was going there, so we had two different opinions. So I had 2 weeks there, and we recommended that we work there, but we worked there on a no-risk basis in terms of detailed cost. In other words, we would provide fees. We would give firm fees for doing certain things, of doing the managerial input, but not for the guarantee the costs of everything underneath. Naturally, if we weren't pretty right with the costs underneath, we wouldn't get any more work. But we didn't know, felt we knew enough about the detailed pricing of that other work.
Okay. And on the way over, you had a bit of a. I remember you saying that you're on the plane in your suit and tie or whatever, you were dressed, and you stopped off at Singapore, and you looked at all these sort of hippie-like people on the plane and how but on the plane, were you the only one who's taken off and?
No, I wasn't. But it was
so tell me the proper story.
Yeah, okay. We were on 747 that was full. There was a time when New Zealand, there's some New Zealanders involved in the drug trade. There was a Mr. Asia who was a New Zealander, who had been, whose name I forget now, and he'd worked out of the UK. Anyway, this was Ian Frame and I got on, and we ended up in 3 seats on the side of the 747. We got with a third bloke who was also an engineer, and I can't remember what it was, but he was a fellow who worked in worked with groups that we knew quite well, and so we good to see him, and we were very friendly, and it was sort of fixed. It was a time of I think there were oil strikes or something, that New Zealand couldn't fly and didn't have any fuel, and so they flew into New Zealand with enough fuel to get back out to Fiji. And then we landed in Fiji. It wasn't on the timetable, and fueled up in the middle of the morning, 3 in the morning or something, 11 at night or some damn thing, and then flew on to Singapore. Anyway, as you say, we were sort of reasonably. We were in business class, and we presented ourselves as pretty conservative-looking people. But the 3 of us were taken aside, and all got done over. And this other fellow had been, not Ian Frame and I, the third fellow. Well, I had an engineering background, and I still can't remember. He was doing travelling around Asia,
right,
doing certain things, and we came to the conclusion that they thought that this fellow might be organising the drops and the importation, and seemed like a great coincidence to them that we should be all so very friendly, and when they looked at the manifest, we were supposed to not know this other fellow. You know, obviously they'd done their homework, and so they said this fellow they might have had his eye on them, and I think they were wondering whether we were bringing stuff in on his behalf.
Right.
Anyway, we got it was they didn't do an internal body search, but they did everything but.
What they do, tell you to take your clothes off? And
Yeah, I didn't take the jockeys off, but yeah, all the other took clothes right off, and they went right through them.
With a dog? Sniff a dog?
Oh, well, not on my body, but when I been through all that and came out, they opened the suitcases, and the dog went all over the suitcase.
Okay.
And then they said, "Is there anything you want to say?" I said, "No, I just want to get going." I felt like saying, because it was a bloody nuisance. It was due to be leave Auckland at, let's say, 7 o'clock at night, and arrive at 7 o'clock the next morning, and you'd had to sleep on the plane. Instead of which it was 7 o'clock, and we arrived at midday the next morning because we'd flown through the next day because we'd flown through Fiji and stopped in Fiji, so we lost some sleep and getting a bit scratchy. Anyway, that was the story there.
What was Saudi like in those days?
Oh, well, I guess it's like it is now. Women weren't allowed to work unless in particular occupations like air hostess or nursing other women, teaching other women. Remember, we went to see the chief bloke of Mobil there because we had a good connection with Mobil in New Zealand. And this bloke had a woman secretary, a European, American woman. No, actually she was a New Zealander, woman secretary. But he was one of the very few who were allowed this because when Mobil first came into the kingdom in 1935 or whenever it was, they'd been allowed to have certain things they allowed, and they allowed to bring in their own secretary, women secretaries, and this is. But generally women couldn't work. Some of the expatriate women, as I understand it, used to come and see their husbands at work and sit way back in the back of the office somewhere, in the back room, working. But as soon as any Saudi-looking person came near the front of the office, somebody rang a bell or something, and she stopped working and became a visitor. But the women, I think, I'm sure this is right, they didn't have to wear a veil, but they had to cover make sure their legs and arms covered, nothing provocative at all. And if a woman, this is what I was told, mind you, I was told that if a woman was driving a car, she was held up by the police, and if a woman was caught driving in a car with somebody who wasn't her husband, I think the woman was deported and the bloke was put in the jail, things like that. So, yeah.
It's all a bit different.
Ah, yes, yeah. And I was only there for 2 weeks, so I can't be an expert, but we did go on this fellow that we ended up not working with, but that we'd gone to see as a possibility, Sheikh somebody or other, and he was a good guy to talk to and so on. We went to his house one night for a meal, but it was all men, and we did hear a bit of a hubbub at one stage, and he was something on the side door, and he had gone out, and gathered there was a bit of a kerfuffle with his wife. I don't think he was beating her, I just think maybe she was telling him, it's about time he spent more time at home with her or something. I don't know what it was, but we never ever saw his wife.
Yeah.
And, we had the old sheep in the whole sheep in the big plate, and, you took bits off and stuff.
Oh, gee, I didn't realise that.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Oh, is there anything else on the work side, Pete, the downer side?
I know, I was just very lucky that it was a large enough company to do this vast range of work, but not so big that it could be compartmentalised to the stage that if you got into one compartment, that was it, you stayed in it. So you just had to deal with, cover all compartments, particularly with more and more of the things I did, and a lot of very able people. If there was anything in construction that you want, specialty pumping a liquid cement into gravel or something like that, it's called grouting. There was always, there would be somebody who was expert at this, particularly foremen. Yeah, so...
Okay, all right, well,
and all the people there, by and large, there's no perfect organisation, by and large they're excellent group.
okay. And you're talking about your retirement now, and your last 10 years you work on average maybe half the week, go for a swim in the morning. You do your Rotary things most weeks, your Rotary attendance.
Yes, I like to do that.
How long have you been involved in Rotary for?
Oh, I don't know, since about the mid-1980s.
Okay, it's quite a while.
Yeah, and I like to do that because I'm just working on my own, and although I talk to people over the phone and I go and see people occasionally on a one-to-one basis, but it's very good to get out, and even particularly when I was in construction too, you get out and you see people of different professions and abilities and callings, and whether they're accountants or lawyers or a civil servant or whatever they are, you know.
And they basically you have dinner and a speaker and some fundraising events, etc.
Yes, yes, that's basically it. Is you go and have lunch and a speaker, and there's a bit of mucking around where you they call it fining people. They take a couple of dollars off you at lunchtime to put into the kitty. And every now and again in the weekends there's the odd thing we do to raise money, but not much. A lot of Rotary clubs do a lot more than we do. No, I go there for they meet just
fellowship.
The fellowship, a wide range of people.
Okay, good. I was going to say, and other stuff you get up to is you quite enjoy the orchestra and the ballet. You're members of the I suppose the supporters organisation for the New Zealand Ballet of the New Zealand Orchestra.
No, we're not. No, we're not.
Well, that's what I mean. You're not. No, you're not.
No, but we do. I probably mentioned to you that when I went to London, I thought I should go to the ballet and the opera and the orchestra. Say I'd been and be able to come back and tell Nana's maiden aunts that I went, but I didn't like it. But in the final event, particularly the ballet, I was entranced by the ballet, so I love classical ballet. I shared an apartment with Bob Barge in the late 1950s in Wellington, and he's very knowledgeable about classical music, and he used to play some of the stuff, and gradually I found I liked some bits, and I built on that. But I'm very much on the amateur side of orchestral stuff, but I do love Beethoven and Mozart and a few of these fellas.
If you need any more advanced tips, you can come and see me.
Yeah. Well, that's right. I'll keep them in mind. And Mum and I go to the plays. Mum, as you know, is an extremely well-read person, extremely literate, very literate, and she likes going to a play. And we like about Wellington is we get in the car at 20 to 6 and go to a restaurant at 6 o'clock and have a meal. Easy parking somewhere quite handy, and then a 1 or 2 minute walk, and we're in the orchestra or the ballet or the play. And
so, hold on one sec, Pete. I'll just do one thing here.